I'm definitely still like grieving the loss of not being able to nurse him. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be all about my breastfeeding journey. Breastfeeding can be an extremely isolating experience, which is why I wanted to make this video. Another reason for me making this video is I exclusively pumped for my son for 6 months, and I want to try to normalize pumping. I know I had never heard of exclusively pumping before going through this, and it's something that was a huge part of my life throughout the past 6 months, and if I would have known anything about it, I think maybe it would have made it a lot easier. So, maybe if exclusively pumping was more normalized, there wouldn't have been such a big learning curve for me. Also, I have my co-host Evie here with me, taking her little morning snooze. So when I was pregnant, I ordered a breast pump. It was one of the things that was on my list to do before giving birth, and I ordered a breast pump through my insurance like many of us do. Little did I know how important that pump would be and how life-altering that pump would be. Breastfeeding is one of those things that I thought would come easy to me as a new mom. I was really excited about the potential of bonding with my son through breastfeeding. I thought, oh, I've never done this before, but like when he's here, I'll figure it out. I had plans to nurse. I took a breastfeeding class. Like, I did everything that I thought that I could to learn about breastfeeding, to be fully equipped to try it out when he entered the world. As it turns out, breastfeeding was much, much harder than I anticipated. And I know if you have a baby, you have probably experienced how difficult breastfeeding can be. After my son was born, he did have a stay in the NICU for 17 days. And so I remember right after he was born, they took him immediately to the NICU, and my husband went up there with him. And I remember my husband calling me. This is not even an hour after I gave birth, and he said, the nurse wants to give him formula. Can we give him formula? I said yes. I made the decision, like, yes, give them formula if that's what they want to do, if that's what they're recommending. Like, if he needs to eat, he needs to eat. So my baby had a bottle way before he was ever introduced to my breast, and I do think that had a large part to play. I don't think it was the end-all be-all. Learning about lactation and through consultants that I saw, it is definitely possible to nurse after your baby has a bottle. It's possible to do a combination of those things. We hear this term like nipple confusion a lot, and while I do think he had some of that, or a lot of that, honestly, this is more about my decision and what the mental and physical toll that trying to nurse took on me, and the decisions that I made for my son and for myself to move forward. So my son being in the NICU for 3 weeks made it almost nearly impossible. He was there 24/7. I couldn't be there 24/7. He is a newborn. He's eating like every 2 to 3 hours, if not more. He's hooked up to cords, he's hooked up to wires, he's hooked up to monitors. Holding him was hard enough in itself, let alone nursing him. On top of us being in the NICU, I had just given birth. I was in the 4th trimester. I was recovering from a traumatic birth. I was mentally exhausted. I was sleep deprived. The list goes on. We did attempt to nurse from the beginning. We attempted multiple times, in the NICU once we got like our routine down there, and we were successful. Like, I want to say there was one time that sticks out in my mind where we were successful at nursing, but it was with a nipple shield. But every time that we tried to nurse, he got extremely frustrated. I got frustrated. I got overwhelmed, and sad that he wasn't latching. And he just, when it comes down to it, he just wouldn't latch. You know, we tried a lot of things. I saw multiple lactation consultants, and it got to the point where the process of trying to nurse him was more of a negative thing than the actual like outcome of nursing him. So while all this is happening, my milk finally comes in fully. I remember the day that I woke up and realized my milk had come in, I was like, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to have my milk come in. Again, something that I did not know being a first-time mom. And so I started to use my breast pump, and I was using it at home. I was using it in the NICU. I was using it every 2 to 3 hours. I really wanted to breastfeed. I really wanted to establish my milk supply and like keep that going, because my baby was sick with a virus that we still don't know what that virus was to this day. And so in my mind, I was like, if I can feed him breast milk, like that's me doing all that I can to try to give him antibodies and get him better. And it was a really like positive thing for me that I felt that I could provide for him as his mom, especially with him being in the NICU. There was so much that I felt like helpless with that I couldn't do. So this to me was like one thing that I could do. It helped me bond with him and feel closer to him. The fact that I knew that he was getting my milk. I remember like when we were in the NICU, even in the first like 17 days of his life, he started like exclusively drinking my breast milk. Like he was no longer on formula, and that was such a good feeling, like such an accomplished feeling. So after a lot of learning and a lot of trial and error, I realized that what was working for us was pumping. I would pump, we would feed it to him. He was exclusively getting my milk. I decided, you know, once he was home from the NICU and we tried again a few times and it still wasn't working, I decided that we were going to go this route, and I made that decision to, you know, kind of stop trying to nurse him. That was really, really hard for me back then, and still even like a little bit now. Like I'm definitely still like grieving the loss of not being able to nurse him. That was really hard, and you know, like I said, it's something that I pictured doing all along, and for that to not work out the way that I wanted it to was just a really hard pill to swallow. But when it came down to it, like my son needed to eat, and there was something that was working for us, and so I decided to just go in on that full force and, you know, make what was working work. Also, a side note here. If your baby is drinking breast milk, you are breastfeeding. It does not matter what vessel your baby receives that milk in, you are breastfeeding. I just want to put that out there. This is something that I'm super passionate about, and I'm trying to like change the verbiage around breastfeeding, nursing, pumping, to say that exclusively pumping is breastfeeding. You are feeding your baby breast milk. You're breastfeeding. Just because the vessel that your baby is receiving it in is not from your boob directly, you're still breastfeeding. So take pride in that. If you are an exclusive pumping mom like me, I know that I took a lot of pride in it, and I was very defensive about it. I actively tried to make an effort to refer to exclusively pumping as breastfeeding, and I think that pediatricians and, you know, OBs and society in general should refer to it that way. Exclusively pumping, first of all, it's a mouthful. In my mind, it kind of takes a level away from the fact that like you're not directly nursing your child, but the amount of work that exclusively pumping takes mentally, physically, time-wise, you get the title of breastfeeding. Let me just say that. I would love to live in a world where exclusively pumping was referred to as breastfeeding, and you didn't have to explain to people, you know, how your baby was receiving the milk, just that your baby was receiving the milk. In the first few months of getting the hang of pumping, I felt a huge pressure to have to explain to people why we weren't nursing. You know, that he didn't latch well, that the NICU had a large impact, that he just wasn't interested in the breast, that he was getting frustrated every time. I felt the need to kind of explain and like be defensive about why it didn't work for us. And I just want to say, if you're going through those same challenges, like you don't owe anyone an explanation about what you're doing or how you're feeding your baby. You know, people asked me questions with positive intent throughout, and you know, I definitely came at it with a defensive, I felt this like sense of looming judgment, which I think and believe is just the pressure of society that I felt. Every time I had to explain to someone that I was exclusively pumping instead of like breastfeeding or nursing my baby, I felt this like pang of shame and guilt that we couldn't make it work, that I couldn't, give the milk to him in that way, that like I wasn't good enough because I couldn't do that. And it was really hard for me to deal with, and really hard, again, just like grieving the loss of not being able to nurse my son. And also just with people asking like, oh, is he on formula or breast milk? Like, it's such a simple question, but as a new mom especially, like I felt a lot of judgment, even if judgment wasn't necessarily purposefully being placed upon me. For me, it was really society as a whole, was the pressure to be a good mom, the marketing that is forced upon us as women, that breast is best and like breastfeeding is best. I mean, I literally saw it on nursing bras, commercials. Like, there's so many implications that like breast is best. And the funny part is that when you're an exclusive pumping mom, like you are giving your baby breast milk, it's just not being received from your breast. And like, I feel so passionate about like changing that narrative. And, it didn't come easy for us nursing. And I did what I had to do, what was best for my son, which was feeding him through a bottle, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. On top of that, our society is extremely uneducated when it comes to exclusively pumping. That's one thing that I realized being an exclusively pumping mom. Even lactation consultants are extremely uneducated on pumping. I was told by my lactation consultant in the hospital that I should pump for 15 to 20 minutes every 2 to 3 hours, and then like I was sent on my way. So, thank God the internet exists, because if it didn't, I would not have learned the loads of information that I did involving exclusively pumping to help me successfully feed my son. So anyways, that is kind of the backstory about what happened, why I chose to exclusively pump and breastfeed my son. I kind of wanted to talk about the difficulties of pumping and what that kind of looked like for me. So pumping is hard work, especially when you have a newborn. It is an extremely time-consuming process. So imagine that you're nursing your baby. Your baby needs to eat, you whip it out, your baby eats, you're done. When you're exclusively pumping, you have to pump, which can take anywhere from like 10 to 40 minutes, sometimes even longer. You have to pump, which takes time. Then you have to feed your baby that milk, which takes more time. And then you have to wash bottles and wash pump parts. I remember in the beginning, I felt like my days were just a cycle of like pump, feed, eat, play, sleep, wash. Like, just as soon as I was like done washing the last load of pump parts, my baby would wake up and like need to eat again. And it would be like a cycle of everything all over again. And luckily, like, I have the privilege of being a stay-at-home mom. So I think that was one of the reasons why I was able to be so successful in exclusively pumping for 6 months. But if I was a working mom, that would have been like so much more difficult. Once my supply was established, I was able to space out my pumps a little farther. So like every 3 to 4 hours, it didn't seem like they were as cyclical and on top of each other as they were. I ordered more pump parts, which was a huge help. Not having to like wash and dry the same pump parts every time I needed to pump. I had like multiple sets so that I could use those and then wash everything later. Was I still doing a lot of dishes? Yes, absolutely. But like ordering more pump parts definitely helped lessen the load on the dishes aspect. I was settling into life at home with my baby, and I started to resent pumping. The mental and physical toll that pumping took on me was like nothing I've ever experienced. I had to be hooked up to a pump for a large majority of the day, which, if you know anything about pumping, it's really hard to pump and do anything else. It was consuming my life. And it was so hard because producing that milk was something that my baby needed. So in my mind, like, that was a super important thing that I was doing, but it was taking time away from me and my baby. It was taking time away from me and my husband. It was taking away from time with me and my family that was coming to visit, like me having to go into the room every 2 to 3 hours to pump and be like separated from people. So that's where it comes back to like breastfeeding is so isolating. It can feel so lonely at times. Like, you're doing this thing that is so important and that society expects you to do, and you don't realize like how much of that becomes your life. I was also pumping once in the middle of the night. I did that up until like 4 months old, I want to say. So, I never ever got a full night's sleep, even if my baby slept through the night, which he did sleep through the night in month 3, like for the entire month. But I never got to sleep through the night because my pumping schedule dictated that, and your pump in the middle of the night is like highly producing, high yield of breast milk, and a really good time to pump like nutrition wise for your baby. So that was something that I didn't want to take away until I got to the point where I knew I wanted to start weaning. Another challenge that I faced with exclusively pumping is called DMER, stands for dysphoric milk ejection reflex. I found out what DMER was after experiencing some feelings during pumping that I couldn't put my finger on, I couldn't explain, so I started to do some Googling. DMER is a physiological phenomenon that affects only 9% of breastfeeding moms. This is a physical bodily reaction to the hormones and mechanisms of breastfeeding, and something that you as a mom, like, this isn't something made up. Like, this is literally a physiological response of your body and of a dip in dopamine when you have a letdown when you're producing milk. So like symptoms of this can be sadness, depression, nausea, anxiety, agitation, restlessness, anger, and I felt at points all of those things. The main one for me was anxiety and anger, and like this agitation that I couldn't explain. I felt extremely irritable leading up to a pump, during a pump, after a pump, pretty much because I was pumping all the time. I felt it all the time. And it got to the point where I dreaded pumping so much that it was like taking a huge mental toll on me. And like, I didn't want to do it, but I also wanted to do it. So it was really hard to like navigate that and kind of realize that once my mental health got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore, I decided that I couldn't do it anymore, and I made the choice to start weaning. So after 4 months of breastfeeding, I decided to start my weaning process off of the pump. I am almost completely weaned now. My son is about to turn 6 months old, and by the time he turns 6 months old, I will be completely weaned off of the pump, and I'm so excited. I feel very, very proud of how far I came with our breastfeeding journey, what I was able to do for him in those 6 months, feeding him exclusively breast milk, and I'm so, so proud of that. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life other than give birth and have my son in the NICU. But essentially the process of weaning is you drop a pump very slowly over time until you're down to 1, and then you just stretch the time from that 1 pump until you don't pump again. And so it took me about a month to wean completely, and every pump I dropped gave me time back in my life. It gave me time back with my husband, back with my baby, back to leave the house. Oh my god, like leaving the house when you have to pump, you can't really, because you have to think about when you have to be home for your next pump. I did purchase a wearable pump instead of like a wall pump for this process because I did decide to exclusively do it, and I will say the wearable pump like made such a difference. I don't think I would have been able to make it this far. The moral of this video is that breastfeeding is no easy feat. It is one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, and I'm so proud of myself for doing it. I'm proud of myself for diving into pumping and learning absolutely everything I could, making it my entire personality. And I'm so proud of the breast milk that I was able to feed my baby and the nutrition that I was able to provide for him for the past 6 months. So if you have fed your baby any amount of breast milk for any amount of time, congratulations. That is incredible. Claps to you, because it is not easy. It is not for the weak. And if you are a mom that made a decision not to breastfeed, good job as well. Formula is a great choice, and my son is completely on formula now, and he's doing fantastic with it. And above all, a happy mom means a happy baby, and you have to do what's best for your baby and for your family. So with that, my baby is crying on the monitor, so I'm gonna go get him. But thank you for watching and listening and hearing about my experience. I hope it sheds some light on exclusively pumping and help normalize exclusively pumping if that is something that you are choosing to do for your family, and make it a little more normal. I will see you in the next one. Bye!